Good afternoon and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management webinar series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Wayne Bowen. I'm the Program Manager for the Recycling Market Center and will serve as your moderator today. We would like to extend a special thanks to Bob Hollis of the Mobius Network for providing the webinar management software for this series, and Lisa Ruggiero and Savannah Betkowski of the National Recycling Coalition for assisting the RMC with webinar promotion and technical support. The title of today's webinar is The Perfect Storm, the Economic Impact of Changes in the Recycling Industry. Our presenter today is Bob Anderson, who I will introduce in a moment. Following the presentation, we will conduct a question and answer session. If you have a question or comment, please use the GoToWebinar dialog box located in the control panel on your screen. You may also use the dialog box to request assistance if you're experiencing technical difficulties during the webinar. Please note that an edited version of this webinar will be made available for viewing via YouTube links on the National Recycling Coalition and Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center websites. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Bob Anderson is the Mid-Atlantic Regional Business Development Manager for ReCommunity. He has worked in the solid waste industry for 29 years and has been with ReCommunity for the past 11 years. Bob is responsible for designing and executing the Mid-Atlantic Business Development Strategy, which includes New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. Prior to ReCommunity, Bob worked with BFI Allied Waste for 18 years, where he worked on mergers and acquisitions. The experience with this company provided Bob with a unique skill set in understanding transportation efficiencies available in single stream conversions. In addition, Bob is on the board of directors of the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center, the Association of New Jersey Recyclers, and he's also a graduate of Florida State University. ReCommunity is the largest pure play recycling company in North America, operating 30 MRFs in 14 states and processing nearly 2 million tons of recyclables per year. The Mid-Atlantic region includes 10 facilities in New Jersey, Eastern Pennsylvania, and Delaware, and currently processes over 530,000 tons of recyclables per year. And so now I'm going to turn the program over to Bob.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending the webinar. I'm at a little disadvantage. This will be the first time that I've actually given this presentation without an audience in front of me, so this is unique. This is a presentation that we've developed to attempt to address some of the changes that are affecting our industry and look towards sustainable solutions to assure the long-term stability of our industry. Our approach is really to look at this from an industry perspective and address some of the inherent changes that are occurring that that processors need to deal with. You know, we're not really looking to point fingers or blame in any one direction. What we're really looking to do is to recognize the changes that are occurring and figure out the best ways to move forward to address them. So as a part of that, private and public partnerships must work together and adapt to these industry challenges. And that's really the theme of what we're looking to accomplish here in the webinar. There are four main buckets that we look at when we talk about the perfect storm and what is happening in the industry that's impacting the viability of our industry. There's the first bucket, single stream composition changes. We're seeing shifts in consumer preferences that are having significant impacts on the inbound stream, and these also include lightweighting and increasing levels of non-recyclable or non-programmed materials that are being placed in the bin. The second bucket is rising labor costs. As we have a national narrative out there that continues to push for an increase in minimum wage, these legislative actions can impact our business about $3 per ton for every dollar increase. As we continue to hear the national narrative of a $15 per hour minimum wage, we have a lot of low-skilled workers in our plants as sorters, and so our business is disproportionately impacted by these minimum wage increases. We're experiencing increased maintenance and processing costs that are really driven by the negative effects of the stream composition. So these plants were designed and built with a certain fiber to container ratio, say a 60-40 split. And as we see the newsprint fraction of the stream continue to deteriorate, that has an impact on our ability to process. Additionally, we see higher rates of contamination, and these higher rates of contamination are increasing our downtime and repairs and maintenance. And then the last bucket that we'll talk about is the depressed commodity prices. You know, look, we all realize that we're in a global industry, and you know, we continue to see significant downward pressure on the commodity prices. The last couple of months, we've seen things pick up a little bit, but the long-term trend is still significantly below what we've seen historically. And I apologize for the slow response time, the latency. So shifting consumer preferences and new packaging designs are causing a significant change in the composition of waste streams processed by MRFs. And really what we're looking at there, we compartmentalize that into 4 buckets. Newspaper and newsprint, as we see continued online consumption of news, it's significantly increasing the amount of newsprint that we see in the stream. Source reduction, we've got lightweighting of aluminum containers. They're becoming thinner and lighter. And we're also seeing that in the plastic grades. Bio-based packaging is one that I'm not going to address nearly as much as I will the others. And then flexible packaging is the fastest growing packaging in the United States, and it's having a dramatic impact on the overall composition. So we see higher value materials being displaced by the lower cost flexible packaging. Again, these are all being driven by the sustainability movement. So I'm not saying that it's good or bad. You know, as we become better stewards of the resources that we have available to us, we're going to see some of those resources pulled out of the stream. The idea of this presentation is really to say, look, this is what's happening. I'm not advocating that we need to go backwards because these are all things that need to happen, but we also need to recognize how that's going to impact the processors and our ability to stay sustainable as we go into the future. So what you're looking at right now is the Sunday paper in 2005 versus the Sunday paper in 2015. There's a couple things going on here. Not only is the paper smaller, but each individual sheet is lighter by as much as 10 to 15%. So one of the things you may ask yourself is, why is the 2015 paper so much lighter than or smaller than the 2005? Well, the best example that I like to give people is when you're out looking for that new automobile or new truck, the first thing you do is go online, you start researching F-150s, and the next thing you know, you're seeing pop-ups on your screen. Your local dealer is saying, we've got the exact trucks you're looking for. In the past, when you wanted to buy a car, you got the Sunday paper out, you would page through pages and pages and pages of new and used cars that were being advertised in the Sunday paper. So a lot of those advertisers have moved away from the hard Sunday paper because they know they can target their approach to people who are looking for specifically for their products on the internet and not waste their advertising resources on the Sunday paper. Some statistics on the decline of newspaper. In 1960, we generated 7 million tons of newsprint. We peaked in 2000 at 15 million tons of newsprint. The latest stats that I had available for this presentation was 8 million tons in 2012. I can almost rest assured that if we had the statistics for 2015 or 2016, I'm sure that we've dipped below the 7 million tons that we had in 1960. From a circulation perspective, we've seen very similar deterioration. The daily Sunday paper used to hit 70% of households. Again, the most available data in 2010 was almost a 50% reduction to 40% of households. I would imagine that 6 years ago, if we were able to get the most recent data, you would see again a significant drop. So we talk about lightweighting. You know, it's not only hitting the metals, but it's also hitting the plastic grade. So we're seeing the ongoing plastic container source reduction by the largest consumer product companies, reducing the amount of plastic that's available for recovery. And what that means is, as a company, we have to touch quite a few more units in order to extract the same amount of value from the stream. Sorry about that. My latency issue is catching up to me here. So to give you some examples of how materials are weighing less and what the impact is, newspapers, you're seeing 10 to 15% lighter per sheet. A 2-liter bottle is 25% lighter than it was in the 70s. A PET water bottle is down about 32%. Aluminum cans are 17% lighter, and milk jugs are 30% lighter. So as a result of that lightweighting, we have to touch more of those materials in order to extract the same value. And to give you some examples of that, we need 10,460 more 16-ounce PET bottles to make 1 ton than we did in the 80s. For those of you who are in the recycling business, you'll know that 10,460 unbaled PET bottles is quite a large pile of material. When you look at specific brands, what they've done, we looked at Coca-Cola as example. Coca-Cola has reduced the PET usage in their bottles by 25%. The EcoShape bottle uses an average of 30% less material. So in the last 22 years, Coca-Cola has reduced their PET consumption by 60%. That's not because they're using or selling less Coca-Cola. It's because they're being better stewards of the PET resources that they have in their generation of their containers. We see a similar movement by Pepsi. Pepsi, in just the year 2013, reduced its PET consumption by 109 million pounds for 23% reduction. What that means is processors who rely on the revenue of commodity sales in order to fund and pay for the recycling program processes don't have as much revenue as they once had in order to pay for those processes. So if the cost to process a ton of recyclable materials exceeds the value that can be extracted and sold in the marketplace, that's where tip fees start to come into play, because the revenue there needs to be enough revenue for companies to be able to sustain their business. Aluminum and metal containers are undergoing similar packaging and source reduction trends, requiring more units and labor to achieve the same output. So it used to be party favor, party trick. One of the big guys at the party would take an aluminum can and and take the two tops and turn them counterclockwise and be able to rip an aluminum can in half. Today, just about anybody could take the top and the bottom of an aluminum can, twist them counterclockwise, and rip that can in half. The other example that I give people in terms of lightweighting, which I failed to mention when we were talking about the PET bottle, a couple of years ago when you had an empty water bottle, that bottle still had some substance to it. Today, when you have a PET water bottle in your hand and it's empty, it's paper thin. So that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about lightweighting. An example of the number of units, we need 12,100 more 12-ounce aluminum cans to make 1 ton of aluminum compared to 1980. So again, it takes a lot more labor in order to extract the same amount of value. Flexible packaging is becoming one of the fastest growing packages in the United States. And flexible packaging is replacing other packaging types such as HDPE, glass, and other materials. And the challenge with flexible packaging is that it acts like a piece of paper, so it becomes two-dimensional. According to the Natural Resources Defense Council, none of these flexible packaging are currently recyclable anywhere in the world. Now, that doesn't mean that folks aren't going to be working towards a recovery system for flexible packaging, but when you look at the challenges of this basically becoming a contaminant with the paper fiber, because we use geometry and physics in order to leverage the physical properties of the material to break them down into their individual components in our current systems. When you've got an empty flexible pack, it acts just like a sheet of paper, and it flows through as a contaminant to the paper. This is an example of flexible packaging that I think really can demonstrate the economics behind the impact to the processor. So if you look at the HDPE detergent bottle, you go back 10, 15 years ago, bigger was better. So somebody would go into the grocery store, they see this massive jug of detergent, and they go, wow, that's a great value. Look how much material, look how much product I'm getting. And so they buy this big jug of liquid detergent. The first movement in the sustainability movement was to go to concentrate. So instead of using a full cup of liquid detergent, you only needed to use a quarter cup, and shrunk the amount of HDPE that was necessary in order to package the product. Now we've moved to these water-soluble pods. From an environmental standpoint, they're excellent because there's no waste. My wife has been using them for a couple of years and loves them. And instead of coming in an HDPE, they either come in the center pouch, which is a flexible pack, or they come in the PET rigid container, which is on the far right. The value difference is, HD pigmented today is somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 to $500 a ton. The flexible package in the middle becomes landfill material. So depending on where you are, that could be as low as $20 a ton, or it could be as high as $120 a ton. And the PET container to your far right, although it's PET, is not necessarily the type of PET that the PET folks are looking for. They're really looking for the blow-molded water bottles. They're not really excited about these rigid plastic containers. So when you look at the HD container on the right, let's say it's worth $400 a ton, you go into a market where you're in New Jersey, it's $100 a ton charge to the landfill. that's a $500 per ton swing to the processor, unfavorable. So instead of getting $400 a ton in value, you're getting $100 per ton in charge. With regard to the PET container on your right, as long as we have enough water bottles that makes the pack acceptable, we can continue to move those. But as they gain a larger and larger percent of the market share, it is going to start to deteriorate the value that you're going to get on your PET water bottles. So how does flexible packaging increase other commodities? Flexible packaging is very light, so 1.5 pounds of flexible packaging will replace 50 pounds of glass. That's not the end of the world. I mean, geez, we all know what challenges there are in glass processing these days. However, it'll also replace 6 pounds of PET and 3 pounds of aluminum. The 3 pounds of aluminum is very dramatic because although aluminum is generally a small percentage of the stream by composition, it has a disproportionate amount of value in what's recovered. And again, when one of these containers is flat, it behaves like paper, so it ends up contaminating the other value streams. Which is a great segue into contaminations. Non-recyclable residue and contaminants are consistently high across facilities, lowering plant efficiency and the value of the commodities produced. You know, I've been out in the marketplace and I've heard a lot of people talking about the good old days when we did dual stream recycling, and there's some advocates for wanting to go back to dual stream recycling, but the reality is that the efficiencies of a single stream collection system are far outweigh any of the detriments to the potential contamination. We have customers who in New Jersey who have had excellent education programs, and when we shifted them to single stream, they stayed disciplined on their education and messaging, and we have not experienced dramatic increases in contamination in those communities. In those communities that continue their education program and maintain that strong education program, their contamination rates are a third of the communities that discontinued or didn't continue their education of the consumer. So my advocacy is that it's not the collection system that's at issue. It's whether or not the education continues. For example, when we went from source separation at the curb to dual stream, if we didn't tell the folks what could go into the paper fiber and what could go into the containers, we would have the same mess that some communities have with regard to single stream. So although it seems like it could be a real easy fix when people hearken back to the glory of the dual stream days, I'm not sure that that's the right approach. When we talk about contamination, we kind of put it into 3 buckets. The first bucket is wishful recycling. The wishful recycling really occurs with some of our most environmentally conscious customers, and they believe that, geez, if I could just get that material in my recycling bin, by golly, it's going to get recycled. And the danger in that is that they're actually being more detrimental to the environment, because if it's a non-programmed material, it's going to go to a landfill anyway. So rather than add all that additional energy and carbon output to take that non-recoverable material, put it in your recycling bin, it takes a trip to the processing center. It runs through the entire processing system. It gets baled. It's put on another trailer and sent to a landfill anyway. If you're truly an environmentalist and truly want to do the right thing, if it's a non-programmed material, put it in your trash can. We also talk about going back to the saying, when in doubt, throw it out. We kind of got loose with some some companies have gotten kind of loose over the years with the spectrum of what's acceptable, and we really need to go back to the future and become more disciplined in our messaging. Unsafe materials is probably the thing that I talk about most when we're talking about contamination, and these are the kind of materials that create dangerous situations for our employees. And we've had pretty severe injuries from items that you would think would be fairly benign. I'm sure if the resident realized that by putting that dryer vent or whatever into their recycling bin that could impact another person's life forever, they wouldn't do it. But, you know, we're getting the yard waste, the wood, hoses, wires, cables, bio waste, including medical waste, diapers, and needles. So we really have an issue with needle sticks as well. And so when we talk about contamination, you really need to think about it in the perspective of, first, the frontline guy who's collecting those materials and put it into the back of the truck, and then for the employees at the MRF who have to sort through that material and could potentially be injured. The last bucket would be household waste, and this is really the bucket where a lot of communities have been used to twice-a-week collection. So some residents just decide that they're going to use a recycling bin as a second trash collection and throw food waste, dirt, put their material in plastics bags. All these materials can cause significant downtime at the MRF. What are we talking about when we talk about dangerous contamination? And that image to your right is an actual image of some of the material that we had delivered into the facility. Clearly that looks like belongs in a transfer station and does not belong in a recycling facility. And, you know, the haulers, the pickers are the ones that are the first line of defense. We've got inbound quality control inspectors at a number of our facilities, and these folks have really been able to affect change by taking images of the materials coming in and sending them to our customers so that they have actual actionable items to be able to go back and affect change. So we get food waste and other household trash, compost, yard waste, hoses, and an increased incident of bio waste. In most of the country, needles, home injection, are not regulated. So a lot of medical professionals instruct folks to put them in a rigid container like a 2-liter Pepsi bottle or 2-liter soda bottle. So a diabetic will diligently put their needles into the soda bottle, and then someone decides, well, the soda bottle is recyclable, so they put that into their recycling bin. And what that does is then expose all of our employees to those needles. If the container breaks, the needles spread throughout the load, and if not, you know, we end up with these needle-laden containers. One of the other big problems that we're having is personal hygiene products like diapers. Believe it or not, you know, we are getting significant amount of diapers at some of our facilities. So the image on your right is an extreme example of what happens to our screens when we have plastic bags. So between every single shift, we have to send an employee who harnesses up, goes into the screen, and has to remove all of those plastic bags. So we've seen non-recyclables increasing by 2 to 3 percentage points. The quality of non-recyclables is getting worse. We're getting more trash and bio waste. Disposal costs are going up, and we're getting lost revenue opportunity by having to deal with all of the non-recoverables in the stream. I will say that our quality control inspectors have had a dramatic impact to be able to reverse this trend. So we have hired these quality control inspectors in order to enforce more stringent inbound quality standards. And there's a high degree of cost in order to inspect, reject, and extract these contaminants from the system. It's also can be a somewhat dangerous process because now you're intermingling inbound quality inspectors on the tip floor where you've got loader operator, loaders, and trucks. So we need to be extremely careful. We have protocols in place to assure the safety of our employees so that we don't create dangerous conditions. The MRF financial performance has suffered due to the cumulative negative effect of stream composition changes and productivity and commodity value. So we got three buckets here. Cause and effect in terms of the stream compositions have impacted the MRFs by as much as $100,000 per month due to lost productivity, slower throughput, and higher residue rates, increased downtime. So for example, if a system was designed for a 60-40 mix of fiber and containers, and that migrates to a 50-50, and you're running a 30-ton per hour facility, that 30-ton per hour facility could be reduced to a 28 or 25-ton per hour facility. When you do the math on that over 2 shifts for 255 days, the impact is dramatic in terms of the reduction in productivity. Increased labor, as we continue to hear well, we went through a number of states that recently increased their minimum wage, which had dramatic impact on our facilities. But now, as we've got the legislators talking about $10, $15 per hour, $16 per hour, we could be looking at a situation where if you're seeing the cost per hour of labor go up, say $5 per ton or $5 per hour, the impact of that is exponential. At $6 per ton increase, you're talking about $30 per ton in additional processing costs with just the increased labor. Again, our industry is unique in that we have a lot of low-skilled labor, so we have a lot of folks that are at the lower end of the scale because it's a low-skill position. So we are disproportionately impacted as compared to, say, a solid waste collection company where you're paying drivers and helpers far in excess of the lower end of the pay scale. And then the CPI disparity, where CPI never seems to outpace the labor cost increases. So as we enter into long-term contracts, if the long-term contract only addresses the CPI, that most likely will not address the increased labor that we'll experience over the term of that agreement, and it certainly won't address if the legislators put through an increase in the minimum wage. So when we have to remove more non-recoverable materials, we must run the plant slower. In conjunction with running the plant slower, we need to add additional staff. So we've got heightened quality requirements by our markets. The equipment is impacted by the fact that these new lightweighted containers and the changes in the composition are taking a 30-ton per hour facility and reducing it to something less than that. And then, we just have increased labor in manually screening the non-recyclable materials from the stream. We're also seeing increases in residue. In 2012, we had an average of about 9% residue across the platform, which in 2014 increased to 13%. One of the biggest battles that we have are plastic bags. When these plastic bags get into the screens and clog them up, it reduces the efficiency of the screen. It essentially eliminates the screen because it's not doing what it's designed to do. So these plastic bags get tangled in our equipment, and our crews must stop machinery 6 to 8 times per day to cut them out. That's according to Waste Management and their sustainability report. So one of the things that we really have been messaging to our customers is the residents need to stop putting plastic film bags in their recyclables or using plastic bags for their recyclables. It creates a dangerous situation for sorry, I have a text message going through my head. Broke my train of thought. When a resident bags their material, what we are finding is that many times that bag contains non-recoverable material. So if our employee takes that bag and goes to liberate whatever is in the bag, if it is a bag of trash, it ends up spilling on the line and contaminating all the recoverables around it. Additionally, we have a significant incident of injuries when we have employees that are ripping those bags open. They're suspect to many more needle sticks. So we are moving away from ripping open bags and exposing the recoverable materials on the line to contamination or our employees to injury. Again, labor cost increases have steadily outpaced the CPI adjustments called for in most contracts. So as we move forward as an industry, we're making sure that we're addressing this disparity in our contracts to assure that there's not a disconnect between what we're required to pay employees at the time the contract is signed versus what we're required to pay them at the end of, say, a 5-year term. There are some potential upsides to higher wages. It may be easier to attract and retain staff, but again, the downside is that the cost per ton can jump up. And depending on the head count and throughput of a facility, throughout this presentation, I've been saying that for every $1 per hour increase can have a $6 per ton effect. The reality is that it's somewhere between $1 and $6, depending on the size of the facility. The key is that as we move forward, these type of costs are going to have to be accounted for in deal structures because recycling facilities cannot continue to absorb these expenses. And, if the CPI isn't going to keep up with the wage rates, then new contracts are going to have to adjust based on something other than a CPI index. It's likely that we're going to continue to see increases in minimum wage, particularly by state legislatures and companies, individual companies. Also, we've got the national narrative of folks who are pushing for the increase in the minimum wage. So this is absolutely an industry-wide issue that we need to recognize and just all accept as we move forward. This chart kind of goes through, if you look back to 1969, you see the CPI on the solid blue line, and then the green line would represent the wages. So wages have dramatically been disconnected from the CPI over the last 40 years. So we get into some, towards the end of the presentation, we start talking about commodities. And the market for recycled commodities has been globalized, while the prices for recovered materials have been in a prolonged decline. So we continue to see downward pressure on commodity pricing. And so we put that into three buckets for this presentation. We see OMP and OCC pricing that has declined over the last couple of years. The last couple of months, we've seen some strengthening of the paper prices. But as we get through the summer season, there is a possibility that we'll see the paper fiber again start to retract. Plastic prices have dropped dramatically due to declines in oil pricing. And we're also going to review a chart that shows a correlation between the price of commodities against the price of a barrel of oil. I want to caution everybody on the call that it is one piece of information. It's not the end-all, be-all, or we're not advocating that there's a direct correlation, but there is a correlation between the two, and it's one tool that we can look at to give future indications on where commodity pricing might go. The China connection, we've got Operation Green Fence, which has really raised the quality bar and forced MRF operators to work even harder producing higher quality materials in a complicated stream. So essentially, the Operation Green Fence has pulled back the curtain on some problems that we've had as an industry, and we didn't necessarily, we either knew they were there and didn't address them, or the commodity markets were so strong that we just allowed it to happen. And then we've got the third bucket would be the future is uncertain, forecasts on how long oil prices will stay low. It's unknown. Some industry analysts are predicting that pricing will not return to higher rates until 2020 or later this year. One thing that I always talk with people about in this presentation is it's really difficult for anybody to know where commodity prices are going to go. The folks that are saying that it might be till 2020 before we start to see higher energy rates are the same folks 18 months ago or 2 years ago were telling us that you'll never see the price of a barrel of oil under $100 a barrel. The reality is that, as we continue to find more resources on the planet, there's been pressure against the oil prices. So this is the slide that I had referenced earlier. Again, I caution everybody that past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. This chart is only plotted through September 15. I did not have time to add the months since September 15, but if you were to extend that out a little bit farther, you would start to see the lines moving upward, which is a good thing. So the bottom line represents the price of a barrel of oil, and the top line represents ReCommunity's average commodity revenue, which is all of the commodities that are aggregated against all of the materials that we sell. So in 2005, you see that there was a much greater disparity between the price of a barrel of oil and the ACR. That was back during the dual stream days when many programs didn't include some of the plastic grades that they do today. So as we see more and more plastics become a greater percentage of the composition of what we're collecting, you see that line come a little bit closer. The green line that goes across the middle at 107.89 is actually the 10-year average price. So you can see that since late 14, we've been substantially below the average, but the trend started below the average in May of 12. If you look prior to that time period, we had designed all of our contracts to really address just potential downfalls in commodity like you see in January of 09. So we had worked under the impression that commodity prices would fall, but we would see them recover fairly quickly. We had not anticipated that we could be down around $40 a barrel for price of oil for an extended period of time, which means there's challenges in the revenue stream for recyclables or recyclers. There's just not enough revenue in the value of the material in order to offset the cost of processing. So if you buy into this correlation and you say that the price of a barrel of oil is going to stay at the current levels around $40 a barrel for the next 4 or 5 years, that would indicate that we're going to continue to have challenges in the recycling industry, and there's a good chance that there will continue to be fees in order to recycle materials to processors. So there's a cost to quality. Higher buyer expectations require more sorting, fewer contaminants. More sorting requires lower speed, more staff, or both. Higher quality expectations reduce the possibility of tag-along recycling of other materials. That kind of goes back to pre-green fence, where today the requirement is to have less than 3% outthrows and prohibitives. Back in the time when commodity prices were very strong, it was very normal to see outthrows and prohibitives in excess of the 3%. So that difference would be tag-along recyclables. The result is higher residue rates in most MRFs and higher sorting costs. So as the requirement for quality got higher, we were required to pull that material out of the stream and hire more staff to do it. So the bottom line is that it's not the processor's fault that we have lightweighting. It's not the manufacturer's fault that we need to be good stewards of our resources, and so we're lightweighting materials. It's not the municipality's fault that the processors are getting hit with higher costs from minimum wages and having to add more personnel. We can all sit here and point fingers at one another and go, oh, well, whose fault is it? The reality is it doesn't matter whose fault it is. What matters is that we need to act in partnership to adapt to these structural changes facing the industry and secure the long-term sustainability of recycling programs. I don't know what the age profile is of the folks on the call, but I just hearken back to Dragnet and just the facts. I mean, these are just the facts. These are what we're dealing with, and we don't see that changing anytime in the near term. So in order for us to continue to have sustainable recycling programs, we need to adjust and react to these structural changes with our municipal partners and assure that the recycling industry stays healthy. So we need for structural change. Over the last 10 years, folks have seen recycling as free. The reality is that recycling has never been free. There's always been a cost. If recycling was free and was driven solely by economics, we wouldn't have the requirements of all the mandatory recycling laws that we have across the state. The other fact is that recyclers cannot bear the combination of higher costs and lower revenues. Unfortunately, recyclers have kind of moved into almost an insurance protection type company where they are taking on the risk to protect municipalities from, or their customers from poor markets. And that's something that companies just can't continue to do. And residents need to understand and take on the cost of recycling. So one of the things that, I always talk to people about is the average home generates somewhere less than 500 tons per year of recycled material. So if you had your home, your resident, if they had $1 per month increase in their fees on a 4-to-1 ratio, that would be the equivalent of $48 per ton to process their recycled materials. At half that, at just 50 cents, you still have $24 per ton. So when you take that aggregated cost and you push it out over all of the users, it's not a big number. But when it gets concentrated in the recycling industry, it's catastrophic for companies to try to survive just on the value of the commodity revenues. And that's the way all of our models had traditionally been built. Our models have traditionally been built on the fact that we were able to sell our commodities at higher values than the cost of process. Well, with lightweighting, residue, the challenges with glass, the increased cost of processing, all of those things have changed the dynamics of the industry. And if we want to have a sustainable industry going forward, these are the kinds of items that have to be addressed. What we've done is work towards sustainable deal structures to support the MRF investments in low markets while offering increased value to consumers when markets return. Look, these systems are extremely capital intensive to build and to maintain. It's not like we can put a system in and not have to continue to invest in it. We've been investing in our systems to change, to improve our efficiencies in reaction to the changing stream, and also for replacement capital. So it's an expensive industry. There are a lot of barriers to entry, and we're seeing consolidation and closing of many facilities across the United States because of these impacts. So with that, I will turn it back over to Wayne and address any questions that you may have. And I appreciate your attention this afternoon. And my contact information is not displayed here, but if you want to reach out to the folks running the webinar, they can make my information available to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bob. That was a great presentation, very informative. Again, we're now going to field some questions for Bob. If you have a question, please enter them on the GoToWebinar dialog box. We do have quite a few questions already, so I'm going to start off by posing this one to Bob. Earlier, you talked about the plant-based pet substitutes. Some used to say that it was usable and recyclable as if it were PET. Is this actually the case?
Well, we're seeing a lot less PLA in the streams, and I kind of skipped over the whole plant-based piece of the presentation because, frankly, as the price of a barrel of oil continues to drop, virgin resin and scrap resin make any kind of plant-based resin not as cost-effective. So we're not seeing any kind of growth in the plant-based PET, but it's not a product that if it gets in with the PET, it's not being recovered the same way that the PET resin is.
Okay, this question asks, could additional bottle bills help offset the declining revenue streams from the lightweighting of beverage containers?
Well, in general, bottle bills jeopardize the recycling infrastructure that's already in place and continue to deteriorate the revenue that would be derived from the curbside. Some of the difficulties in bottle bills are that you need to create another infrastructure for reverse distribution of bottles where you already have, say in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, where you already have significant investment in order to extract these materials from the curb. I know that there's a lot of folks that advocate bottle bills, but we just recently did a 20-year contract with the state of Delaware, and they have moved away from their bottle bill and towards recovering curbside. I don't have the statistics on what the increase has been in the state of Delaware, but it's been dramatic in terms of the overall recoverability through the curbside program versus what they were getting through their bottle bill.
Okay. Here's a comment followed by a couple questions. You paint a gloomy picture with wishful recycling, unsafe materials and household waste, and then glass and plastic costs to process exceeding their value. What is next? Do we stop collecting a lot of the items that are we collecting today?
Well, I usually have the audience in front of me, and I do have a smile on my face, folks. This is like when you're know that you got to take cough medicine when you're a kid, and you know you're going to feel better, but you really don't like the taste of it at the time. These are just the facts of what we're dealing with, and we either address them and move forward, or continue to do more of the same, and we'll be headed towards a cliff. We firmly believe that the sustainability movement and recycling in America are important. Our company continues to invest in it, the commodity markets are what they are, but the reality is that the folks that are using the system are going to have to fund it. I mean, we're a service provider just like any other service provider. If you have someone who's collecting in your municipality, you have a contract, that person gets paid for their truck and their driver and to transport their material from point A to point B. Our point is that we are a recycling processor. We have base costs with employees, with utilities, with energy, with maintenance, and you know what? We're entitled to a reasonable profit. The industry has been able to function for a long time off of the sale of commodity prices, but that's not what we can continue to move forward with. We're in a situation where if it costs X to process materials and Y is the value of materials, when Y is less than X, there has to be a fee. and when Y is above X, then we can have a revenue share that'll pay communities for the recyclable materials. But the old system where we enter into a contract and we take on all the risk is not a sustainable business, because any processor cannot be in the business of subsidizing a municipal recycling program.
Okay. Could you address the potential benefits of municipalities providing some enforcement remedies to help clean up the incoming stream?
Would you repeat that?
Could you maybe talk about municipalities upping their enforcement activities to make sure the incoming stream is much cleaner?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you two examples. The city of Philadelphia, when we started their contract, had a high contamination problem, and they run maybe 70, 80 trucks a day, and in a very short period of time, through education of their collection crews, we were able to dramatically alter the inbound stream. The city of Wilmington, we recently did a similar program where they had a contamination issue, and in a very short period of time, we're able to turn it around because their collection crews were leaving the materials at the curb. My belief is that these collection crews know who the offenders are. And if they're empowered to be able to leave those materials at the curb, there can be a lot of immediate change that can occur in the near term. And when you're talking about messaging to the broad community, it's like moving a battleship, right? I mean, you could start messaging today, and it might take 3, 6, 8 months, years in order to have that message finally filter its way to the folks in the household. So we recognize that, any kind of communication to the resident always takes a long period of time, but the first line of defense is always the collection crew. In terms of enforcement, the city of Philadelphia does have street sweeps teams that can go out and fine residents. I think that fining residents really kind of falls in the category of last resort, and if you have one of those folks that just is using their recycling bin as a second trash collection, the city of Wilmington will pull their can and tell them they're not allowed to have a recycling can, or the city of Philadelphia will fine folks for being habitual contaminator of recycled materials. But I think that needs to be one tool in the total kit.
Okay. How will extended producer responsibility factor into the picture moving forward?
I don't have a tremendous amount of experience with extended producer responsibility for, materials other than, say, the electronics. But living on the East Coast and dealing with New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, extended producer responsibility laws regarding electronics, not working real well, folks. Either the laws are bad or there's ways to circumvent them. But I've been in multiple meetings where the producers just are not stepping up to the plate and covering the responsibilities for the products that they've made. So if we could get a successful model on electronics, then maybe I would advocate that you could see something happen at curbside and recycling. But right now, there's a lot of challenges in the electronics. And Wayne, you have way more experience than I regarding extended producer responsibility regarding electronics.
Yes, and we have had some webinars in the past covering that topic, so perhaps that's that's something we can revisit for a future webinar. This question asks, are you seeing an increase in packaging, especially from the home, that is partially offsetting the large decrease in newspaper consumption? I think they're talking about cardboard. Do you think the OCC recovery represents an opportunity for the industry?
Yes, with caution. With online shopping, clearly we have seen an increase in corrugated at the curb. However, I would add to that as anecdotally, because my wife and my daughter and my son are avid online shoppers, so UPS is regularly at my house. I see a trend towards those Mylar envelopes and stuff, and a trend away from corrugated. I mean, some things are definitely going to continue to come in corrugated, but more and more products, you know, my wife buys some clothing from a retailer. It used to come in a cardboard box. Now it invariably comes in a plastic film bag, a mailing bag. So I am anecdotally starting to see folks moving away from corrugated towards plastic bags, which I guess from cubing and shipping and everything from a sustainability standpoint are superior. But again, it impacts the recyclability of that material. So yes, we do see an increase in corrugated that is offsetting some of the decrease in fiber, but is that going to be sustained in favor of flexible packaging remains to be seen.
Okay. We have time for one more question. How do we help customers to understand and take on the cost of recycling?
Wow, that's a great question. I think if folks realize how little the investment is at the home, and the example that I give people is, my goodness, what are folks willing to pay for their cable TV or internet? I mean, to spend $100 to $200 a month, or their cell phones, or some of these other essential services that folks consume every single day, and then to translate that down to recycling, where it's $1 per month, 50 cents per month, the economics are not even close. And I would argue that, you know, waste management, recycling at the home, although the consumer doesn't see it when it works well, they certainly will see it when it doesn't work. So when they come home and the recyclables are left at the curb, that's a problem. You know, unlike the TV or the internet where it's consumed every single day, or your cell phone is consumed every single day. But the reality is, when you put it into perspective of what folks are willing to invest in those items, the sustainability of a sound environmental system of waste management in their home has got to be worth at least an extra 50 cents to the dollar, right?
Okay, good answer. We do have a bunch more questions left. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So actually, we have these questions that show up on our attendee report, so I can forward this to Bob, and he can perhaps respond to some of these. And also, you may contact us. We'll give you Bob's contact information. You can contact him offline to get your question answered. So again, this webinar, like all the webinars in this series, has been recorded and will be made available via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and Recycling Market Center websites. Thanks again for joining us, and thanks again, Bob, for the great presentation and those questions answered. We'll hope you'll join us for next month's webinar, and please visit the NRC and RMC websites for scheduled updates. And have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.